Once again, welcome to this event in honor of Professor Paul Lovejoy, who retired here at York uh, not too long ago. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement, just in recognition of the fact that this York University is, in some sense, also on colonial land as it stands. York University recognizes that many indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of the university. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territories of many indigenous nations. The area known as Takoronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Unro Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty orders, beneficiaries of Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Pum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I'd like to appreciate everyone who is here present and on Zoom. Thanks to the Department of History and the Harriet Tubman Institute for jointly hosting this event. And I'd also like to appreciate the senior university administrators who have graciously agreed to attend this event, both on Zoom and in person. I'd like to appreciate Professor Uzo Anusha, who is the Associate Vice President, Faculty Affairs. She's on Zoom. Professor David Mitima, who is the Acting Dean of the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, and also the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs. And my own Chair of Department, Professor Catherine Mayferton, and then the Director of Tubman, who is unavoidably absent, but is also on Zoom. She's joining us via Zoom, Professor Moshe Alawaye. And Dr. David Koff is meant to be on Zoom. Does he? Yeah, he's in Zoom as well. He's the director of research partnership at York, and I invited him precisely because of not only because of his relationship with the honorary Paul himself, but also because when I was hired at York, Paul sent an email to connect us together. That is really someone to look up to when it comes to research work within the faculty. I also want to recognize the presence of the Roots Cultural Foundation team, led by Ms. Pamela Clark, and to everyone here present. I'd like to start with this big apology that it's impossible to take tributes from everyone. So we're going to stick with what we have in the program. The last time I checked, there were 62 tributes online already submitted. And we have more than 62 people on Zoom right now with even way more people in the room. So we're just going to stick with what we have in our plan. And I once again want to apologize to people who have planned to speak, but we would be unable to invite them to say something. But I'd like to assure you that if you've written your tributes online, like through the form that was sent, and if you haven't done so, please do it. I'd like to assure you that everything written would be sent to the honorary himself, so he would have access to everything you want to say. And lastly, I'd like to acknowledge Professor Toyin Falola, who has written a big tribute in the form of an entire book, a single authored book, to appreciate Paul Lovejoy for his friendship over about 40 years, I suppose. The book itself is entitled Transformations in History. I had planned so hard to have multiple copies in the room, but it's not available to order on Amazon. And I couldn't reach out to the publisher in time. So you would make do with the photos. We'll try, I'm sure we'll try to make an arrangement to get copies of the book to the Tubman Library at the very least. It's a big book, single authored, not an edited volume, written as a long tribute, dissecting different aspects of Paul Lovejoy's productive career that has spanned 55 years and counting. And I'm just counting from 1970 when he was hired at York University. So he came to York University 55 years ago, even before he got his PhD, 2 years before he got his PhD. These days, it's almost impossible to get tenure track positions before getting your PhD. But I guess those times were different. And over the course of 55 years, he stayed at York, which is also a big deal considering the nature of academia today. And he's maintained so many friendships and collaborations over the years, published so many books. I don't want to go through his citation because that itself is a long journey. His CV is well over, the last time I checked, over 30 or 40 pages long, and for over 40 pages, 43 pages, yeah. And they're not like double line spacing, or they're like single line spacing. So it's a lot to go through. But and it also is also, I mean, it's not someone that I need to introduce anyway, which is why I won't be going through his citation. In any case, I'd like to acknowledge everyone here present once again as we begin the event with some opening remarks. Professor Uzor Anocha, I'm going to ask her to speak, then subsequently the Dean, Acting Dean of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, and then following her would be Professor Kate McPherson, the Chair of the Department of History, and after her would be Professor Moshalewa Olawoye, the Director of Tubman, and then lastly, we would have Dr. David Koff. Everyone has 5 minutes, so I kindly ask that you please keep to the time, and you need to use this microphone if you're in the room. But Professor Anocha will be joined is on Zoom, so please unmute. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here to celebrate Professor Lovejoy. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. Really, really excited to celebrate him for his incredible impact as one of the most influential historians of Africa and the African diaspora for more than 5 decades, both in Canada and globally. Apart from my role as the Associate Vice President and Faculty Affairs, also speaking as a scholar who was born in Nigeria, West Africa, and who spent the first part of my life there, I acknowledge with immense gratitude the influence that Professor Lovejoy's work has had in reshaping how we understand slavery, resistance, migration, the lasting legacies of African people around the world. His influence, has extended not just Canada, but around the world. He's been vice president of SHEC, president of the Canadian Association of African History, fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. He was a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair. His scholarship is defined by a passion to uncover truth through history, but also grounded on this very deep respect for the people and communities at the heart of that history. I think when you look at the names and everyone who is online, is a testament to what that respect has been like, the relationships he has forged. He started at York in 1970, and he's done just about everything here. Distinguished research professor, chair of the history department, associate vice president of research, and of course, the founding director of the Harriet Tubman Institute, a legacy that still exists today. And it's so fitting that this tribute, this celebration in his honor is happening there in something that he founded and built. Professor Lovejoy isn't just a brilliant historian, but he's also, and that's, I think, for me personally, what I appreciate about his work is his deep commitment to service at York, to building collegial structures. Usually, when you see scholars who have such an impressive research profile, they tend not to pick up service work. But he also did that. He was chair, he was vice president, associate vice president of research. In closing, I would like to know that in addition to all these professional accolades that he rightly deserves, I'm also personally impressed and inspired by how generous he has been with his time, knowledge, and support. And Paul, I don't know if you remember this, but when I arrived at York in 2006, almost 20 years ago, and you read in Y-File that I had an international project doing work in Nigeria, you immediately reached out to me and to see how you could support me. Though I was in social work and you were in history, if you did that, I can only imagine your mentorship of students and colleagues in history over the years. So, Professor Lovejoy, on behalf of the Office of the Vice President, Faculty Affairs, and from me personally as an African scholar, thank you. Thank you for making York a leader in African historical research. Thank you for your brilliance, your leadership, your generosity over 50 years. Your legacy is not just of excellent scholarship, but of kindness, collaboration, and vision. On behalf of scholars like me from the continent, thank you for your kindness. And I wish you everything good in your well-deserved retirement. Thank you.
Does that work? Am I being heard? Thank you. Um, uh, I just want to welcome everyone. My name is David Mutimer. I'm the Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs in Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, but really am here with you today because I am at the moment acting Dean. And so on behalf of the faculty, it's a pleasure to welcome you all to this celebration of the career of Professor Paul Lovejoy, as well as the launch of an enlightening book that highlights his extensive contributions. I do want to bring greetings from the Dean, from J.J. McMurtry, who's currently traveling in Southeast Asia, building institutional links and hopefully recruiting some new students into a variety of our programs, and hopefully at this very moment getting some well-deserved sleep, as I think he's in Vietnam tonight. He is, however, very sorry that he wasn't able to make it, but would also like to welcome everyone on behalf of the faculty. I would also just like to take a moment to thank those who've put this event together, to Professor Adebayo, to the Department of History, and to the Tubman Institute for hosting today's event. And to acknowledge the special guests that we have here today, both in person and virtually. Professor Toyin Falola, the distinguished professor from the University of Texas Austin and author of the book that we're launching today, Transformations in History, African Societies and Economies in the Work of Paul Lovejoy. Professor Rina Caceres, my apologies, professor at Universidad de Costa Rica, and Professor Lovejoy's wife and collaborator. And Professor Martin Klein from the University of Toronto, a longtime collaborator and friend. Additionally, a heartfelt thank you to all of today's presenters and friends who are here to pay tribute to Professor Lovejoy's remarkable career, spanning 50 years and more of high-impact teaching, groundbreaking research, and institutional leadership. And today we gather to honor the many achievements of Professor Lovejoy. The people who helped prepare the remarks for the Dean for this had at this point a nice long list of the contributions that Professor Lovejoy's made. Most of them you know, some of them Uzo just led us through, so I won't do that. I would just like to circle back to Paul's role in founding this institution, because I spent quite a lot of my early career in a research center just down the hall, actually. And it was in my role as a research director that I first met Paul and worked with him in the research community at York. And so I have a particular fondness for the contribution that he's made to research institutions here, among the many other contributions that he's made. He officially retired a couple of years ago as one of the longest serving faculty members in York University's history. And yet, even in retirement, Professor Lovejoy has continued to produce original archives-based research, mentoring students, serving his global communities. And in fact, I may get this wrong, and you can correct me if I did, but I think as I was sitting down, you just said that your most recent book has just been published and you have a copy of it here today. So, yep, still going strong. Thanks to his leadership, the Department of History at York University, that I won't say much about because you're about to hear from their chair, but it is among the best places in North America to study African history, with its PhD graduates working at some of the finest universities in Canada and around the world. Professor Lovejoy's work has impacted profoundly in the fields of history, shedding light on vital aspects of African societies and their histories. His contributions have shaped not only academic discourse, but also inspired countless students and scholars over the years. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to a lively afternoon's discussion of insight and tribute as we celebrate Professor Lovejoy's enduring legacy. I'm sorry I won't be able to spend the rest of the afternoon with you, but I think you will have a wonderful time. And thank you everyone who's joined us here in person and virtually, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks very much.
Okay. This working okay? Yep, good. Okay, so my name is Kate McPherson. I am the chair of the Department of History, and I'm delighted to be here to bring the congratulations and appreciations to Paul. Among other things, you know, many people skedoodled out of York during COVID, and we didn't have a chance to celebrate. So it's also really nice, even if it's a little bit late, that we're able to have this event to recognize you, Paul. So Paul was one of the founding members of our Department of History, and he was really a field builder. He, along with his compatriot Sidney Kanya-Forstner, the Butch and Sundance of African history of our department, along with then subsequent colleagues, which include, of course, Professor Curto, Deb Neal is here, and of course, most recently, Damalola. And I want to thank you, Damalola, on behalf of the department for getting us organized today. I really appreciate it. His Paul's field building also included contributions even when he wasn't here. So on several occasions when he was on leave, he arranged for colleagues to come as visiting professors. So we had Professor Falola was here one year, and also the other Adebayo, the other Professor Adebayo, came to bring their expertise in African history to us. And of course, then the many, many graduate students and postdoctoral students who flowed through the halls of our department, bringing shenanigans and expertise and joy as they pursued their research projects. And I think field building, we think sort of continents, but of course, Paul's influence was also transcontinental because his interest in trade and especially the African trade, but also other oceans, the Atlantic trade, other oceans, also brought him into contact with our Latin Americanists. Jillian is here today, thinking about sort of the global nature of the influence of African history. I received a message from one of his early colleagues, Richard Hoffman, who wanted me to share this to say that he's very saddened that he's away in Europe when this long and influential career of Paul will again deservedly be celebrated. Richard writes, Paul and I joined the department at the same time and have often worked together on its behalf. I remain grateful for Paul's encouragement as chair, which inspired and enabled me to complete my own first book. This is another kind of sort of the often unseen labor and support that senior colleagues like Paul have brought to our department. Paul's broad promotion and demonstration of a productive scholarly career set an essential tone for life in the department. I rather expect Paul's latest retirement will not stop his active and important work in the field of African history writ large. So Richard asked me to share this with you. Paul has several other things you might know about him. He was once, I think, the owner of the world's largest scanner, which sat in a mysterious room in Founders College that when in the early days of digitization, we were going to digitize all those manifests. I don't even know what happened to that scanner. I shudder to think. But for me personally, Paul was also somebody that it didn't matter where you ran into him, in the halls of York Lanes and the halls of the department, before the hellos were over, he was brimming with enthusiasm about some latest find or some latest insight he'd had or some latest collaboration he had. And that infectious energy for research really spilled over into all your students and your colleagues and your collaborators. So on behalf of the Department of History, Paul, I want to congratulate you and thank you for all joining us today to celebrate Paul's remarkable career. Thanks.
And now we're going to have the top man director, who is joining us via Zoom.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor to be here today, albeit via Zoom, to celebrate someone that I'd like to say, if he didn't start to walk, I won't be able to run. The founding director of the Harriet Tubman Institute, Professor Paul Lovejoy. I'd like to start by saying that so sometime last month we had I think I got an email, about a meeting for African and African diasporic research around Canada and for the institutes that were responsible for them. And so we had the meeting yesterday, coincidentally, and while we were at the meeting, I was hearing the struggles of a lot of people, especially those who were just starting their institutes. Maybe this was the first time, they're the very first directors. And at some point, I found myself saying, when it was my turn to speak, I am grateful that I am building up on the work of a lot of giants that have gone before me. So I couldn't relate to a lot of the struggles, and it's because of people like Professor Paul Lovejoy. When I first started this job, I remember getting into the Tubman office and walking into his office and just looking around. And first of all, the Nigerian in me was very excited to see a lot of our history right here at York, and I was like, wow, this is exciting. And then the second part of it was he had actually, like, I remember the first year when I started, like first month, he had reached out to me and then asked for a meeting. And what that meeting was at the end of the day was a guide for me as I went through in this role. He had offered help, which was great because there I was in a new role wondering what to do. He made some really great suggestions that have helped me through the role. And then one other thing that I noticed, and so that wasn't just for me, it wasn't just mentorship, it was also mentorship for students as well. One of the great things that I have noticed is that he has done a great job, which is something I'm usually begging our scholars for, applying for grants and passing them through the Tubman Institute, which ensures that our institute continues to run. One of the things that I have also noticed is his great interest and his great work in terms of student mentorship and support. A lot of the RAs that he has hired through the institute, or the people he has brought into the institute that have helped the institute continue to grow. We're very grateful for that. He's built a great network of scholars at Tubman. I was listening to one of his interviews, and when he was describing himself, this was one of his interviews online. He said he's very intentional about international collaborative mentoring format in his kind of work, and that we have seen even at the Harriet Tubman Institute with the things that Professor Lovejoy has done, with the people he has mentored, even myself. How he has pushed the work of like the works from the history of African diaspora through the works. It's no coincidence that the Tubman Institute started around the time that he was Canada Research Chair in African diasporic history. So we started around that time, just around that time, and it speaks to the kind of work that he has done in the background, the kind of foundation that he has laid for the rest of us to build on, and I am truly grateful for that. Earlier on, I had heard about 62 tributes online. I didn't even know it had gotten to 62. A few hours ago, I had just asked our coordinator at York, and we're just trying to see what was going on. And it just seemed like she's like, oh, we're getting more. And I'm like, wow, this really does speak to the kind of person he is, the kind of scholar he is, the kind of academic he is, in pushing in pushing people, in mentoring people, in ensuring that scholarly attitude that helps build successful scholars is passed on from generation to generation. So on behalf of the Harriet Tubman Institute, we want to say thank you very much, Professor Paul Lovejoy. We want to say congratulations on your graduation, and we wish you a wonderful time still writing, because we know you're still going to be doing great research. Thank you.
Wonderful. And so I'm David Cuff, the Director for Research in the Research Office in the Faculty of LA&PS. And I want to start by thanking you, Damalola, for the invitation to speak at this book launch and celebration for a truly remarkable researcher and colleague, Professor Paul Lovejoy. I must say, as I've listened to the summaries of Paul's career from colleagues, I admit it has been rather humbling to learn that when I was born, Paul had already been employed at York for several years. My remarks, therefore, can only be partial at best. Now, colleagues assembled here today hardly need me to remind them of Paul's immense collegiality and commitment to both his research and his students, but I thought it might be relevant to reflect on the scope and scale of some of his funded research, given that I work in a research office, and that's a place where we often spend our days agonizing over such things. I say some, dear colleagues, because while Professor Paul Lovejoy has worked at York since the early 1970s, our faculty of LA&PS has only existed since 2009, and York University itself kept records largely in paper until the early 2000s, an irony perhaps not lost on a scholar who is an early adopter of digital technologies and tools to preserve historical documents. This makes the task of a fulsome assessment of his career contributions somewhat challenging. So I checked the public database of SSHRC programs, hoping at least that our federal funding agency could be relied upon for a fulsome record of his many research projects to share with you today. SSHRC, however, only goes back to 1998. Even so, I would like to share that even in this fraction of an immensely productive career, Paul's research has received over $6.2 million in funding from SSHRC alone, a highly competitive peer-reviewed research program that includes 2 terms as a Canada Research Chair, Tier 1, and 12 research projects that include multiple partnership and insight grants. This alone would represent a highly accomplished career for any historian at a Canadian university. That this is only a portion of Paul's career is, as I said earlier, humbling. And small wonder it is that Paul's peers have seen fit to support his research so extensively. In the short time that I've been at York, I've come to know how groundbreaking and transformative Paul's research has been and continues to inspire, as new technologies have expanded the horizons of documenting, preserving, and sharing the history and experiences of enslaved people so that future generations can know and learn from and reflect on their stories. So from myself and for all our staff in the LAPS Research Office, congratulations, Paul, for all that you've accomplished and for your many contributions to your department and to our faculty.
Right. Thank you to everyone who has given the remarks. We are still listening to more people speak, and we've divided the tributes, as it were, because even comments on the book, everything counts as tribute as far as this event is concerned. So we have two sections with a musical interlude performed by also 2 former students, but accomplished musicians in their own rights. We're gonna begin with the first session that would feature about 7 speakers. There's 6 of them listed in the program, but there's a 7th person that unfortunately I missed out on. We'll begin with Professor Ana Lucia Araujo, who is a full professor of history at Howard University in DC and an internationally renowned scholar of many. It was published so many books. I mean, all of our achievements. And it's humbling to think that such a scholar with such huge profile, that Paul Lovejoy was actually on a PhD committee, and she was also at some point a postdoc at York University. And then we're going to have after her Professor Edmond Abaka, who is also a professor at the University of Miami and also a graduate of the York Department of History and a former PhD student of Paul Lovejoy. and Toby Green, Professor Toby Green at King's College London, who is not a graduate at York, but is also a long-term friend and admirer of Paul Lovejoy's work. And then we're going to have Dr. Olatunji Ojo, Professor Olatunji Ojo, who is just about 2 hours away at St. Catherine's at Brock University as a professor there, also a former student of Paul Lovejoy and a scholar of many important works. Then Professor Katrina Kiefer at Trent University, also a former student of Lovejoy. And then we would have Professor Akurang Pari, who is at the University of Ghana in Legon, who is also a scholar of Africa and has also published many works some of which I read while I was a graduate student myself, and is also a former student of Lovejoy. So it's really humbling to see a lineage of influential scholars who have shaped the field and who've passed through Paul Lovejoy. And lastly, in that list, we're going to have someone who is an influential scholar in his own right and was apparently a research assistant to Professor Paul Lovejoy in the 1970s while in Nigeria. I believe is on Zoom, UNISA, or something, UNISA. Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna have him speak last. So I'm gonna open the floor. Most of the people who are gonna speak are online and they have the program already. So they know the order in which they're gonna speak. But I'm gonna invite Professor Analucia Roger to kickstart the tributes. Thank you very much for honoring our invitation.
Thank you, Damilola and Toyin, for inviting me to speak today. I will not speak much about the book, but more about Paul and Paul's work and what it means to me. I met Paul in 2004, then this is 21 years ago, and I had just completed a PhD in art history at the Université Laval in Canada, and I was starting a second PhD in history also at Université Laval. And I lived in Quebec City at the time, penniless, and my advisor, Africanist historian Bogumilia Javitsky, introduced me to Paul, and Paul welcomed me not only at the Harriet Tubman Center at the time at York University, but also at his home, as he did with all his students. So my meeting with Paul 5 years after I left Brazil opened up to me new doors to see my home country through the lens of African history and the history of the trade in enslaved Africans. And Paul had and has this amazing magnetic energy and enthusiasm, both as a scholar and also as a person. And he quickly became then a mentor from whom I had the privilege to know enormously about the history of slavery and the Atlantic slave trade in African history. And this was in a time when social media didn't exist. I didn't even have a cell phone. Then we exchanged most part of the time by email. And sometimes, of course, we met a few times depending on the year. So back then, Paul fulfilled several roles in my career as a young scholar and also in my personal trajectory. He became an attentive interlocutor with whom I could exchange about my work on the history and memory of slavery in the Republic of Benin and Bahia in Brazil. And he also became this ride or die academic co-conspirator in some way. Together, then we planned conferences, conference panels, publications, grant applications. And one of my earliest memories of Paul and his team, and several of these people are still today my dear friends and academic partners, people who I love, Mariana Cândido and Yacine Dadiadum, among others. And I remember that conference that we co-organized in Quebec. And the title of the conference was Crossing Memories, Slavery, and the African Diasporas. And Paul back then drove from Toronto to Quebec with his students to stay in a very modest residence to make that conference happen. And that conference ended up resulting then into a co-edited volume along with Mariana Cândido that is titled then Crossing Memories. So back then, all my work was written in French and my first language was Portuguese, and I could barely speak and write in English. And Paul pushed me to write, and he was then a reader, an editor, a copy editor, a mentor, and one who never judged me or doubted my abilities. And I dare to say today that I became a better writer than he is, but he was there in this beginning, and it's thanks to him that this happened. I would say that the word no is not part of Paul's vocabulary. He was always ready to embark on any project related to the history of Africa and African diaspora. And we co-convened then several multi-session workshops on slavery in African history at the American Historical Association annual meeting. And our exchanges expanded then from panels and conferences in Toronto, Quebec, Montreal, Boston, Paris, Aix-en-Provence, Washington, D.C. And Paul introduced me to dear historians. And I see here Janie Landers, Joe Miller, who is no longer with us, Élisée Soumoni, who is no longer with us as well. And Paul became then a member of my PhD dissertation committee back in the time. And informally, he was my co-advisor as well. And then as a postdoc that I got a fellowship to come to Tubman, but eventually didn't continue in that capacity. So Paul supported my work in all possible ways. And of course, we also had our fights. And I think that is important to mark that. But then in 2008, our paths separated. After then, I accepted a tenure track position at Howard University, where I've been since then. So I would say that over the past 17 years, we continue to collaborate directly and indirectly. And among others, I recently had the opportunity of being one of the readers of his amazing book. Then on, let me just put it here, on Bakwakwa, that was just published. So I would say that Paul is very probably the scholar who had the most impact on me and my work. And Paul's work is everywhere in my own work and will always be. And this presence is, in my opinion, the most profound form of love that we as historians can offer to each other. Because at the end of the day, love and what we write are the only things that will remain when we'll be gone. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am delighted to join an illustrious group of faculty, of administrators, colleagues to pay tribute to Professor Paul Lovejoy's incredible work, his incredible friendship, and his contribution to the field of African history overall. On page 17 of the book, in honor of his retirement, Professor Falola asserts that Paul Lovejoy is an institution builder. And I want to take that point and give it another dimension. I mean, during Paul Lovejoy's time at York University, students have benefited from his scholarship, from his training, from his networking acumen, from his resources and the like. Now, many of us were international students, and we got more than just educational training directly from Paul. He shared his network of scholars with us in practical ways. And for me, it was as if he was telling us or holding up to us this mirror for us to look at other best practices in doing scholarship. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that as a graduate student, I would encounter an illustrious group of leading scholars and professors of African history, that I would get to see Richard Rathbone, David Richardson, Robin Law, Christine Mann, David Eltis, Maureen Warner-Lewis, Philip Zachernak, Jane Landers, Elise Simoni. The list goes on and on. That, to me, was the icing on the cake. It was a different dimension of training and mentorship that has stuck with me up till this time. And of course, between Professor Lovejoy and Professor Klein, we got a whole royal treatment. This is the context in which I met Professor Toyin Falola for the first time, as well as Professor Akanmu Adibayo. Now, in addition to this, I also want to highlight that those of us who were at York during the time of the Rwandan genocide got to see another dimension of the work of Professor Lovejoy, working with him at the Center for Refugee Studies during the time of Professor Alma. For me, that is the context in which I got to meet General Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian military officer who commanded UN troops in Rwanda at the time of the genocide, because he came to York University and gave a presentation at the Center for Refugee Studies in York Lanes. Similarly, I want to highlight again the Nigeria Hinterland Project, which not only made an essential contribution to the history of Africa, the Atlantic slave trade, and African diaspora studies, but also was something that I would argue laid the foundation eventually for the Harriet Tubman Institute. In all of these instances, some of us got to work with Paul Lovejoy, moving beyond the excavation of academic material into other dimensions of professional training. And I think this is very important. And for this, I am forever grateful to Paul Lovejoy. So on this occasion, I would say Ayiko Obinfu Paul Lovejoy. We know that this is retirement on paper because you continue to work, but we glorify the fact, we are glorified by the fact that you continue to impart your knowledge, your wisdom, your skills, your acumen to colleagues, to us, and to all those who would encounter you in the course of this journey. So congratulations and thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. It's a real joy and pleasure to be here this evening for your retirement celebration, Paul. And celebration it is because, as we're already hearing, there are so many moving things to say about your work. I've actually been asked by Toyin and Damalola to speak specifically about the book, which Toyin has written about your contribution to the field. So Toyin had a book and I have 5 minutes, but I'm going to try. I mean, Paul, firstly, your work speaks for itself and much more richly than any of us here can do. But I want to begin with a few thank yous. I want to thank you for showing us all that you can be a great historian, a generous colleague in so many ways to so many people, and yet still drink bottles of cachaça and long into the night and carry on the next day. I don't want to say that's your greatest gift, but it's certainly important to remember that sociability is really an important part of life and brings, as Ana Lucia said, love. A historian who lives only in the archive away from people will only be able to produce part of the story. And that's something I've learned from you. I also want to remember the first time we met, which was in 2010, quite recently compared to many people here this evening, but it was at a conference in London at the German Historical Association. We were on the same panel. but nothing you did or said implied anything other than two scholars working on the African past. You wear your work and achievements lightly, and that's a great thing that you do. So what to say about Toyin's book? Well, I think I was asked partly because I was a peer reviewer of the book, so I can think of nothing more appropriate than to read a few lines from the peer review which I wrote for the publisher. This book offers a panoramic study of the history of Africa and Africans, both on the continent and in the diaspora, during the era of the transatlantic slave trade and right through to the present. This is, of course, a crucial and important facet of the history of the world. But what is remarkable is not so much the topic as the vast knowledge and thought which has gone into the manuscript's preparation. So in many ways, it is a book which builds on a lifetime of thought, feeling, research, and experience into this most significant of topics. Every page is filled with a depth of thought and reflection. The haunting, passionate, uniquely rhetorical academic style matches the unparalleled significance of this topic. The author has based their study on the works of Paul Lovejoy. This is a significant objective and certainly appropriate to the vastness of the topic they've chosen. Lovejoy is, as the author sets out in the introduction to the book, certainly one of the 2 or 3 leading figures ever to have lived who has focused their intellectual endeavors on the historiography of the subject of slavery, both in Africa and in the diaspora. Lovejoy has produced a vast intellectual output, as the author shows in this book, and the immensity of that output is also testament to the immensity and horror of the topic at hand. Lovejoy's legacy also includes the mentoring and advising of vast numbers of graduate and postdoctoral students from all over the world who have pursued his work and advanced the transformation of the field of history, which, as the title of this book indicates, he has worked to achieve. And it's indeed appropriate for Lola to measure their own approach to the subject in conversation with the approach of Lovejoy. What emerges is a paratextual dialogue between 2 of the most significant figures in the historiography of the African continent since the field of African history was institutionalized in the 1960s. Of course, in the book, Toyin then does what Toyin does and takes all that in his own singular direction, but always in dialogue with Paul. And if I had a sense of deja vu, it's because I've seen this dynamic before when Paul was still an editor of African economic history alongside Toyin. All that's to say that, like Paul, like Toyin, this is a book that will have a long legacy. It provides a systematic overview of the enormity of slavery and colonialism in African history. And it does so, moreover, with enormous vim and feeling. The prose is among the most powerful, trenchant, and conclusive I've read in an academic text. It's a worthy tribute to both scholars, and the book itself is testament to why we're here tonight. We're here to mark your retirement, Paul, but we're here to celebrate you. And so many of us would not be here this evening, working in the fields we're in, were it not for the huge labours you've put in. But I want to end with an anecdote. For some years now, I've been teaching a final year undergraduate course here at King's College London on diasporas. As part of this, we have a class on trading diasporas, and I always get students to read your 1978 article on the Wangara from the Journal of African History. My co-teacher on this class often draws my attention to the lines on the penultimate page of the article, Paul, where you say, nonetheless, the study must be considered preliminary, since more information is needed on the growth of Hausa agriculture, Tuareg and Fulani livestock production, the Munyo, Mangari, Chadic and Bilma salt industries, craft production and iron mining, smelting and smithing. And my co-teacher says, almost every year, if it's preliminary, when is the follow-up coming? Some people aren't very fair, but the question actually shows me just how many paths you've opened up, Paul, and how many there are still to follow. And for all of that, we thank you tonight.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lovejoy. I apologize for not being there physically. I'm currently in Asia representing the university. But as we celebrate this remarkable milestone of Professor Lovejoy's retirement from York, it's with great admiration and heartfelt gratitude that I present this short tribute. Professor Lovejoy, or Babanzaki, which means big lion, as we called him, was my teacher, kind of different from another teacher that we called Keremin Zaki, small lion. As a student, I found it easier to approach him. His approachability promoted an environment where learning thrived and where students felt empowered to speak their minds and express their ideas freely. Truly, he was more than a teacher. Over the years, he's become a friend, a mentor to me and many, guiding his erstwhile countless students and colleagues with wisdom and generosity. I called Paul Mr. Fix-It. You having troubles with tuition, talk to Paul. No accommodation, go to Paul. You having other challenges, if you discuss with Paul. Basically, when you're having troubles, Paul is the go-to person. Throughout his great career, Paul exemplified the qualities of a remarkable educator. Approachable yet firm, strict yet friendly. His commitment to excellence in research and mentorship impacted generations of Africanist historians, many of whom attribute their success to his guidance and wisdom. In 2010, a group of his students organized a series of panels at the Canadian African Studies Association's meeting. The conference was basically to honor him, saying thank you, but also to mark his birthday. And just this year, in January, he was also nominated by students and colleagues for the highest honor, the African Studies Association in the US. Again, I apologize, I missed the American ceremony, but if I had been there, I would have said this. In addition to Lovejoy teaching us in classes, I personally enjoy the seminars and tutorials in his house, Casa Lovejoy. But it's not the seminars or the tutorials that you expect. Rather, it's the parties, the food, the drink, and of course, the dancing, the connections. And again, Edmond talks about the networks, the countless number of people that you run into basically being around Lovejoy. In celebrating Paul, we honor a living legend whose contributions to scholarship, mentorship, and academic outreach have left an indelible legacy. As we reflect on his remarkable journey, let us be inspired by his example and continue to strive for excellence in all that we do. One more thing before I round up. I want to thank Professor Toyin Falola for writing this book honoring Paul. I called Professor Falola Kabiesi, which in my culture means king. In this volume, he synthesizes over 50 years of Lovejoy's academic writings. When I came to Canada years ago for my doctoral studies, I came primarily to work with Paul on a topic related to slavery, because my teachers then in Nigeria were reluctant to supervise the topic. So I have picked chapter 5 of the book, titled Forces Behind Slavery, Geography and Trade. The content is much deeper than the subtitle. The chapter threads Paul's work on slavery, commercial organization, biography, trade networks, SALT, Islam, ideology, jihad, illegal enslavement, biography, anti-slavery, and more. It opens with a discussion on the duality of the slave trade, one European and the other African, and how African forces shaped slaving operations. A harsh environment and strong state system confined Europeans to the coastal area, and African ethics regulated slaving business. The book engages with Lovejoy's transformation thesis. For Paul, African societies responded to the forces of global capitalism. But slavery was more than selling captives for cash or for goods. Captives also served as soldiers, farmers, traders, transporters, and running the state depends on enslaved labor. But this had its downside. The expansion of slavery led to corruption and moral decay. Laws hitherto protecting citizens from captivity became insufficient as the demand for labor soared. In Muslim societies, the ulama, the clerics, while not opposed to slavery, demanded social reform to protect themselves and their followers, resulting in jihads across West Africa between the 15th and the 19th century. Besides the scholars were the traders. Paul in his writings was more interested in Muslim trade networks, the Agalawa, Wangarawa, Kemberi, Beriberi, and so on. These networks, sometimes organized into cartels or mafias, each united by ethnicity, language, and religion. They controlled trade in specific areas and created satellites or diasporas across the African continent. Above all, they developed mechanisms for crossing state and regional boundaries, networking across political divides, and providing goods and services. Enough said on the book. Happy retirement, Babanzaki, teacher of teachers, living legends, mentor, and an outstanding academic. May your days ahead be filled with continued blessings, fulfillment, and the joy of knowing that your impact on our community, on me as an individual, endures for generations to come. Thank you so much.
That I chose to apply to York because I was there and because of my deep desire to study African history with one of its finest scholars. Under Paul's guidance and through the Human Institute, I was profoundly changed and inspired, and I came away a better human for my years spent as his student. I was taught from the day that I set foot in York Lanes to see my fellow graduates as people with whom I would co-author and collaborate, and to me, they became something very like siblings. This was a deliberate creation of community and culture that was led by Paul and by his colleague Jose Curto, and it profoundly encouraged my own inherent interdisciplinarity and my collaborative approach to research. Together, these two men shaped our experiences and our intellectual achievements, and we learned as a collegial team at Tubman. It made my years at Tubman with Paul into a profoundly enriching and always joyous experience, where I was there to learn with every fiber of my being, and I was given every available tool with which to do so. As a mentor, Paul himself was then, and remains to this day, a brilliant, shining inspiration for me intellectually. I am periodically awed to think of all that I learned in his classes and from him, and sometimes I joke to friends that I really needed those 2-hour commutes back home to Peterborough after class sometimes, just to process all of the new information and the new ways of thinking and seeing that I had learned. Having him as my mentor has been a privilege like no other. His intellectual generosity, his unceasing drive to explore and to learn more, and his tremendous wealth of knowledge made me daily wish to be a better person and to try harder. It was through him that I was first able to present my own ideas around identity and the permanent marks which define us and those among whom we are truly home. I note here that one major approach to training that I always observed whilst directly learning from Paul was his immediate recognition and celebration of unique ideas, no matter whether they arose from an undergraduate or from a colleague. My ideas around scarification and identity were recognized and fostered as I constructed them, and Paul's encouragement of my ideas, his challenges to me to take my ideas further, made me delve deeper and deeper into conceptual frameworks and new ways of seeing. But as I've studied these marks and how they manifest culturally and historically, I feel I have to note that from this place of my own scholarship, that I, like my colleagues through Tubman, carry my own marks. We all carry our own marks of community that were indelibly inscribed upon us by Paul Lovejoy. We're all marked by his authenticity, the scope and the scale of his tremendous vision, his willingness to learn and to celebrate others and always elevate ideas, and with his uncompromising appraisal of human historical actions. As a person, and as someone I call both my mentor and my friend, Paul Lovejoy possesses a mind which is constantly active, and it invites shared activity. He is inspirational, and he demands of those around him no less than he demands of himself. He is a man who lives his values and represents a degree of excellence in scholarship and academic achievement that I would be proud to attain even a portion of. Sitting in his classes and listening to him talk was an act of enrichment, and having the great privilege of studying with him was for me an act of learning that I will never forget, and I call upon every time I want to be inspired. There's one anecdote that I'm going to permit myself in the brief space that I have to speak, because it's been so important to me both as a human and as a scholar. During my research into the registers of liberated Africans in the course of my doctoral studies, I was increasingly growing aware of the true horror of the transatlantic slave trade, the lives which had been so callously marginalized or obscured, and the degree of brutality which humans are so capable of inflicting upon one another. I got very depressed, and I started to find it very difficult to imagine a world where hope and optimism were at all possible. In desperation, I wrote to my mentor. I needed his support. I needed his anchoring. I asked him to tell me how on earth he could study these darkest of historical events and still be sane and able to see life's beauty. He wrote back very soberly and seriously and exhorted me to take my own despair and my outrage and turn them into a fuel to drive me forward in my work. He told me to use my anger at these injustices to fight to unearth the voices of those who had their names and their stories robbed from them. I never forgot that moment, and I've done exactly as he told me. There's a power in rage and in the drive to do whatever is in our own capacity to make this world a better place. And Paul Lovejoy's deep decency and his support gave me space to find the fuel which today keeps me going. I've sometimes discussed the concept of mastery with close friends. It's an idea that may seem antiquated, but it's one which fundamentally underpins the Academy. The concept of a master sculptor or an artist, and the tremendous honor that exists of being able to learn from someone with such determination, depth, and gifts. Or medievally in the novitiate of the monastic orders which oversaw education as a whole, at one stage requiring a master under whom one studied. Professor Paul Lovejoy is a master of his craft, and whether it be sharing anecdotes over drinks, or sitting in a seminar room at York Lanes, or in the audience of a conference hall, it is a privilege to learn from such a master. I had the tremendous fortune to do so, and it is an experience that I hope to always learn from and to honor. And if I can bring the same love of learning and for African history to my own students, then I hope I've paid a proper tribute to our Zaki.
Is Professor Akarang Pari online? Okay, if he's not online, what about Professor Yunusa? Oh, okay, the connection failed. Okay, so we'll move on to Professor Yunusa. Uh, so Yunusa is online, but it seems as if his sound is currently disconnected. So we'll probably take him with the next set of tributes slash book review. We have a short break because obviously it's gets tiring when even when the tributes are like glowing, and it still gets tiring when you have to keep listening and listening to the same thing. But luckily for us, our break is also going to be facilitated by former doctoral student of the York University's Department of History, a former PhD student supervised by Paul Lovejoy. We have two of them in the house, Dr. Jeffrey Gunn, Dr. Gunn, who is a historian of Liberia, who published a really, really excellent book on the crew, which I scanned through and I really enjoyed skimming. And he's a touring and a session and professional guitarist, like travels the world. I'm jealous of him. I follow him online and I think he said he went to 30 countries last summer alone, just within the summer, performing. And as a film consultant, he's everything. He's done it all, really. And also we have Fabio Silva. almost can't pronounce your last name. You know that already. Magalhaes, who is also an accomplished, yes, the leader of the Cascadura band, an accomplished Brazilian musician, band leader, has over 100 songs to his credit in Portuguese, and also currently a doctoral student here at York. We're lucky to have both of them. So we have 10 minutes. Please keep to time, and then we'll take the next session. Thank you.
Just before we start, just want to say fortunate to have studied with Paul as a supervisor, having him as a mentor and a dear friend. And from the amazing classes that we had, traveling the world, presenting at conferences, this is probably the best way we can say thank you to you, just through music. So thank you, Paul.
All right, so in this second session, we're going to begin with a special presentation by the Roots Cultural Foundation, who are community members, and it also speaks to something important about our honoree today, Paul Lovejoy, that is not just an academic, but he's also someone that is actively involved in community life, both at the local and international level. So I am going to invite Miss Pamela Clark and our team for a 5-minute session, and then we resume our tributes in line with what we have in the program.
It's so good to see so many of you out today to honor such a great leader as Professor Dr. Paul Lovejoy. Roots Cultural Foundation have adopted him, and we affectionately call him Brother Paul. At this time, we will give you a bird's eye view in one of Brother Paul's support outreach in the community. I'm here on behalf of Dr. Winston Clark, the founder of Roots Cultural Foundation. And with me here are members, Mr. Nelson and Mr. Sun. I'm honored to be presenting our dear brother with this token of our deepest gratitude for his dedicated assistance in our research project and for imparting to us valuable knowledge of African history. Brother Paul, the positive impact you have given to Roots Cultural Foundation will help to shape our lives and that of our generation, and it will give us more insight of who we are as a people of African descent. Your humility, your sense of humor, and true inspiration has made a difference in many of our lives. It's always a pleasure to have you around. I think your calling to study African history was a divine mandate to follow in the footsteps of your ancestors. Thank you for being such an inspiring and engaging member of our academic society. As you turn the pages of your current vocation and embark on your post-retirement journey, may the Almighty continue to bless, guide, strengthen, and take you to a higher spiritual and divine calling, and be with you in all your future endeavors. We wish you all the best in your next venture. And we know this is not retirement for you. Token.
Thank you very much, Cultural Foundation, for the well-deserved recognition. So we're going to move on to the second session and hopefully final session of our tributes this afternoon. After this session of tributes, then we would have a response from Lovejoy himself, and then would have a book of tributes presentation. It was meant to be done into a proper ebook type to be presented, but as of 12 o'clock this afternoon, I still had an important person reaching out to me to say, I've just sent my tribute. And then I remember having to reach out to Rebecca, who is institute coordinator, and by the way, who is responsible for some of the back-end activities, I should note. She's just right here. Hi there. So I got an email from her saying we have more stuff. So we only have a working draft right now, and for the book of tribute, and we're gonna have more, which we'll present to him privately. So even if we cannot take everyone's presentation here today, please be rest assured that he is going to receive your gratitude, and is going to read every single text and email that you've sent to me. So the second session will feature a number of speakers, 6 if everyone is here present. Would begin with one of Paul Lovejoy's oldest friends and collaborator, also here in the GTA, the great Professor Martin Klein, who is here present, retired long before Paul Lovejoy, and still active. And then after him, we would have Professor Mohammed Bashir Salau, who is a professor at the University of Mississippi. I'm not sure if he's here at the moment. He said he's currently traveling, and he might not have perfect Zoom reception for the internet. I mean, you can guess that it's probably somewhere on the field where it's going to be difficult for him to access the internet. And afterwards, we're going to have Dr. Ibrahim Hamza, who is also one of PhD graduates here at the Department of History, supervised by Paul Lovejoy, and then Dr. Jili Jemirade, and then Professor Susan Schwartz, who has flown to attend this event all the way from the United Kingdom. Arrived this morning, and I think returning this weekend. That's incredible. And then lastly, would have the person who has written the longest tribute. I mean, the book itself, as I said, is a tribute. Professor Tony Falola would be speaking in this session. If we are able to get Professor Yunusa back online and Professor Akuram Pari back online, we might take them, take their session. But if they're unable to join because of their internet connection, then it will be quite unfortunate. But Professor Martin Klein, the floor is yours. Everyone has 5 minutes. We're just about 8 minutes behind schedule. Again, I'm emphasizing this because I really want us to finish at 5:30 in line with the time. So I'm gonna be a timekeeper. So if you see Fabio or someone or myself reaching out to you via Zoom, please note that it's the time that we're watching out for. But 5 minutes is a long time, and people have kept the time so far, which is a good thing. So the floor is yours, Professor.
Yeah. The demo just shut me up, just because I've been collaborating for 50 years, which puts me ahead of just about everybody else in this room or on this set. When there were very few Canadian departments of history when Paul and I were hired in 1970, and thank you, and 71. In fact, the issue at the U of T when I was hired was not whether they wanted me, but whether they wanted Africa. One of my colleagues, senior colleagues, gently asked me, didn't I really belong in the anthropology department? And I explained to him carefully and very politely that what I did was actually not very different from what he did. And I think for both Paul and myself, what has been very important is that we have put African history on the map. And we have put African history on the map partly because of you here and you online there and the people we can't connect. And also a community. I think one of the most enjoyable things that I did was at Paul's suggestion. We brought Jayatha Adeajayi here. And Ajayi spoke to 3 different communities. He spoke academically. He spoke to a community of Nigerians, all dressed up in their Nigerian finery, and he spoke about reparations. And it was an exciting event, and that was one of the little things that Paul has done. In any case, I was for many years a Lone Ranger at the U of T. That is, I was here. Today there are 4 people teaching African history at the U of T. And there's a totally different world. I not that I can fault my colleagues, because they let me teach what I wanted to teach. They let me teach more than 20, I produced more than 20 PhDs. And what I want to do, I think when Paul and Sydney were hired, it was pretty much the same thing. And Paul's genius is partly, I'm not going to go over things that people have said, was partly that he made African history important here, and not only here but elsewhere. I'm at Paul's first year, he lived in the annex. We were a couple blocks from each other, and it was great having somebody I could talk to about Africa. And our interests were parallel. You know, Paul worked on the Hausa, I worked on the Wolof and Mandi, and we did an article together. We did it. I had done an article on slavery in French West Africa. And I tried to do some comparison, but I gave it to Paul and I said, do you want to compare it? And I think it's an article that still stands up pretty well on slavery and in West Africa. I'm not going to repeat all the things that I said, but I'd like to just tell a few stories. Paul and I, I gave Paul that article and he rewrote it and introduced the Hausa, the northern Nigerian situation. And about a year or 2 later, Paul said to me, would you like to do a book on a history of slavery in Africa? And I said, sure, but I got to finish something first. And the book, it was 18 years before I finished the book. It was 2 years. In 2 years, Paul had out Transformations in Slavery. And I don't need to tell anybody in this room that Transformations in Slavery it's now in the 3rd edition or even 4th edition, not 4th yet, just 3. It's the 3 editions and a French translation, no Portuguese. Portuguese too? Okay. It is the standard history of slavery in Africa, and it has weathered time. Paul I mean, the edition, I don't know if you've rewritten very much, but because my impression is that all you've done is added the bibliography. And 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 what was at that time, I had a few graduate students, and Paul and Sydney didn't have any, and I thought it would be interesting. I thought it'd be interesting to get a York UST collaboration because I was all alone, and I had other Africanists, but I didn't have another historian, and uh, and and it's but I held back because I thought I would end up. Thank you. I thought I would end up exploiting Paul, and within, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, Paul had more graduate. Paul and Sydney, and I have to give credit to Sydney. Sydney was a very good collaborator, and within, let's say 4 or 5 years, Paul had more students than I did, though I had over 20. I don't know how many you had. And it was, and he also became a real empire builder. He learned about grantsmanship. And at the time, I was skeptical about million-dollar grants. I was a partisan of individual grants, 50,000, a lot of different people. But Shirk asked the three of us, me and two colleagues, Joe Miller and a woman from University of British Columbia, to review Paul's program. And it was awesome because we got not a critical word. And the responses when we interviewed students were all unanimously favorable, unanimously what Paul had done and what the program had accomplished, and so we ended up, whatever my reservations, we ended up with a rave review in which the three of us were quite. The third person, I don't remember what her field was, but it wasn't Africa, but she was very impressed, and Joe and I certainly were impressed. I don't want to go on at great length, but I want to say that a lot of what Paul has done is that Paul is a very social being. You all know, everybody in this room knows, and I think I would just like to mention two things. One is the conferences. There were constant conferences at York, and the conferences. Three things. I want to mention three things and then shut up. One is that the conferences at York were exciting. He brought different people in. He also gave his students a platform, and this is very important. That Paul was very determined to give every student a chance to present, both at the conferences held here and at conferences held at CAS and ASA and the American Historical Association. The second, and I should never promise to say three things. I turn 91 next year, so next month. One of the problems is that you forget things. Though my wife somehow manages to keep going. And this. So I mentioned the conferences and the parties. After every event, there was a party, and I can't say I think the parties were essential. Many of you probably cooked at those parties. They were collaborative. They were collaborative events, and there was the thing that Joe and I discovered is this sense of collaboration, this sense of community that Paul created, and which I hope I had with my students. I just attended a retirement gig for Richard Roberts, and he had the same, the sense of collaboration, sense of community, the sense of working together. But what was really important is that we created African history in Canada, and we had not only the students we inspired or we mentored. We also had most of my students were West Indian, and by the 80s or 90s, I was getting a lot of African students, and this experience with Ajayi, the community out there appreciated and responded to what we were doing, and I still remember one of our friends, who Paul knows well, Carol Ann Agard, said to me, "You're not bringing Jacob Ajayi here just to talk to a bunch of students." And she insisted that we had to get him to speak to the Yoruba community. We had to get him to speak on reparations, and we did. And that community is there. One of the exciting things about teaching African history, I think for both Paul and myself, is that there was an African community in Toronto, and we just saw a witness. I can't. I think I've probably used up my 5 minutes. I could go on. I could go on for 2 hours talking about the collaboration, telling stories about being with Paul in Avignon, being with Paul. I could tell stories about Paul and his fur coat in the early 70s, but my time is up, and I have to give other people a chance to speak.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's hard to stop Klein. I mean, I guess also we have the advantage, sadly, that Professor Bashir Salau is not online, so that was also, so I was checking the time, so that sort of helped as well. So our next speaker is Dr. Ibrahim Amza, and afterwards Dr. Delija Miradi, and then we go and then subsequently that will be, yes, Professor Susan Schwartz. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damilola, for the honor. And thank you, Zaki, for inviting me again and part of the community. I first met Paul Lovejoy in 1992 in Sokoto, Nigeria. And but the longest time we had together discussing for the first time was in 1993 when he was organizing conference on Sokoto Caliphate and the European powers. And prior to our meeting, I know Lovejoy, like, for example, any scholar, any historian, history student knew Lovejoy from the basic literature and the syllabus of any African history that is being taught in Nigerian University and many parts of West Africa. So seeing him in person, because he has a very funny name in Nigeria. Joy is the name of a girl, and then love, there's nobody who's love. So when you have Lovejoy, when you say, is he a person? I say, yes. And then when I met him in Kaduna again, through Abdullahi Mahdi, and let Abdullahi Mahdi, Abdullahi Mahdi said to me, Ibrahim, I'm going to embed you with this good scholar, and then you can never part with him. I said, what am I going to do? He said to me, oral history, transcription, translation, archival research, you all know because you've been living in Kaduna for long. So I am winning you and passing you over to Lovejoy. I thought it was a dream until one of his students, Jumare, also, at that time, Rockefeller Foundation fellow, came and said to me, you and Lovejoy should go together because you have to extend your research beyond Polly Hill's critique, because I was the only MA student who took up Polly Hill's work and wrote an MA on it. And then Lovejoy read the chapter and said, you know, I like her. I said, I don't know. Then he said to me, come to York. So he was the first professor I met that drove all the way during very bad weather to pick me up at the airport, Pearson. I arrived, I called him, I said, I don't know where to go. He said to me, I'm coming, stay where you are. So at that time, the going back. So, and at the same time, when my wife came also, Lovejoy drove her around in his very elaborate Pontiac GT, very muscle car. We can never forget that honor. So going through my relationship with Lovejoy is just being a naughty student and at the same time, very good collaborator that he cannot do away with. And each time with his Hausa or Sokoto Caliphate, he will say to me, Hamza, what is this word? I say, you know it. I say, yes, I know it, but your Hausa, tell me what. So I give him like a thesaurus definition of all the words that we're dealing with. So when I first came to York, I arrived at UNESCO York University in Nigerian Hinterland Project, which gave birth to Harriet Tubman Project Institute. I can never forget our collaboration. It was a whole community. And every time we meet, it's just arguing about where is the foundation argument of every aspect of African history that we study. At the one point in time, I look at him and say, okay, Lovejoy, I say, yes. Can you tell me your relationship with your professor? He said, who? I said, your supervisor. He said, oh, like it. So I'm going to quote what he said to me. He said, when he was writing his dissertation, P.D. Cotton, his professor, said to Lovejoy, he told me I did not need to prove basic economic principles but that instead I should go and read introductory economics textbooks. I was proving that when the merchants were able to carry a certain quantity of goods at a particular value and could only bring back what they could carry and had to calculate the value according to what they had brought and could sell. So he told me that that's interregional economics in African history in 19th century. If we go back now, come back to this contemporary time, we will know that every time state put new tariffs and taxes and everything, they stifle growth and development. And there's called merchants and other goods tend to move away. So Lovejoy said to me, you see, everywhere you go, there is this relationship between what the value of the merchants can carry and what they can also trade. So I will cut most of what I will say here and say that I benefited immensely in my association with Lovejoy because when I wrote on Cargill, he didn't like my thesis and I insisted in writing it. So I wrote about Cargill. Cargill was a colonial officer who had very bad relationship with Africans. And now the legacy of Cargill exists in African history because for the first time in a kingdom, we have two kings actually fighting for the same throne. So But why do I look at Lovejoy's work differently? Because I agree that Lovejoy believes in a usable African past, the path that seeks to establish empirical evidence in the intellectual contribution of African history as a discipline, not just an appendage of European enterprise in Africa. So each time he will ask us, say, what is the use of this argument you put in? Does this make sense? Even if it is oral, even if it is archival, if anything that you brought to Lovejoy, you be prepared. We had three things that we can't run away from. If your argument goes through Lovejoy, it will be torpedoed by KF, Kenya Posner. If you're lucky, you meet Martin Klein will give you 600 ideas that you come back brain, and then we say, we don't know how we can save ourselves from these three professors. Thank you very much, sir.
I have no written notes, so but I'm just going to use my 5 minutes and then I will say my mind. I met Professor Paul Lovejoy, whom I mean, I don't call him Paul Lovejoy or Professor, I call him Zaki. You know, in northern Nigeria, the emirs or the kings are referred to as Zaki, and Zaki in Hausa language means a lion, and Professor Afalola calls him lion. So I picked that word and I just call him Zaki. I came to Canada not to honestly do a PhD. Like I came here as a permanent resident, and I just changed my mind that, okay, now I'm going to do a PhD. I have a master's degree from the University of Lagos, and I checked the names, and I saw Paul Lovejoy, African History. Okay, let me go and meet him. And then I came to the office, and then he said, oh, do you know this? Do you know this? I said, no, I don't know this. He said, then who do you know in African history? I said, I don't know anybody. He said, okay, you want to do a PhD? I said, yes. Okay, then go and bring your proposal. Then I brought my proposal and he checked it. He said, no, it's not good enough. You know, and I don't even want you to do Nigeria, and I want you to do Sierra Leone. I said, okay, you know, I'll do Sierra Leone. So then we were preparing to go to Sierra Leone. Then Ebola came. He said, sorry, Della, you can go to Sierra Leone. I don't want to send you there to die of Ebola. I'll be all responsible. So started my thesis, and he said, okay, you have to read Ibrahim Hamza's thesis because there are a lot of things that you need to refer to. I said, no, I'm not going to give. And he said, okay, yeah, and then you have to give Ibrahim Hamza's thesis your thesis to read, so he will guide you. I said, no, I'm going to give you everything to read. If you don't want to read it, then you give it to him. He said, do you really want to do a PhD? I said, yes, I want to do a PhD. Okay, then you have to listen to me. I said, okay. So, I submitted my second chapter. He said, oh, this is all rubbish you're writing. I told you, give it to Ibrahim Hamza. So then I gave it to Ibrahim Hamza. He's here. And he said, okay, you know what, you have to listen to Lovejoy and do exactly what he says, So then I wrote everything again. Then, I said, okay, I'm not satisfied with what you're doing. It's still garbage. Then I got an email from Professor Martin Klein. He said, Delhi, you need to see me. I said, okay, I'm coming to see you, sir. So where? Professor Martin Klein has a restaurant that's his specialty to him. He likes it. It's somewhere in downtown. So I met him there. He paid for my lunch. We met 4 times. He paid for 4 of my lunches and refused to allow me to pay once. I said, I have a job. Let me pay. He refused. And he told me exactly what to do. This, and what to do, and then you'll be good. And then whatever Paul says, don't even argue, just do it. And I thought, okay, that's fine. So I followed his instructions, and I happened to be the last student of Paul Lovejoy before he retired. I have that honor of being his last born. Although he had other students that he supervised after me, but those are your illegitimate kids. I'm the last one. Lovejoy honestly helped me even when I did not need help, like financially. Like, he told me, oh, I'm going to give you some money. I said, some money for what? I said, yeah, I'm just going to give you some scholarship. I said, really? Yeah, just going to do some few work for me here and there, and I'm going to pay you. I said, no, honestly, I have a job. Yeah, I told him, I have a job, and I don't want to mix it up with my own job. I just want to do my PhD and leave. He said, come on, do the job. And so then I started doing some clerical job for him. And honestly, it's like being paid the job of a manager. Like I was doing like a cleaning job, and I was paying so much money, and I had to save thousands of dollars. I mean thousands. I don't want to mention that amount because I don't want to embarrass him. But I told Professor Martin Klein exactly how how much I got. I got so much money, and I'm very grateful to Professor Lovejoy. And I believe, I was lucky to have him as my supervisor. And anywhere I go to, and people say, who supervised you? Paul Lovejoy. I say, oh, you must be lucky. I'm telling you. And I believe, I was lucky to have him to supervise me. And he was a great man. He's still a great man. He took me out to lunch, one-on-one, lunch, dinner, breakfast, more than 10 times. I mean it, more than 10 times. And he didn't allow me to pay. One day, allow me to pay, sir. Not going out with other students. The only prof that I know that after the class, he would take every student and buy them dinner or lunch with his own money. But one-on-one, he bought me lunch, dinner more than 10 times. And I look forward to one day when I'll buy him dinner or lunch, and then buy Professor Martin Klein to buy his wife to Irina lunch one day. And I'm really grateful to you, Professor Lovejoy, for giving me the opportunity to work with you, for you to be my supervisor. Remember, I'm your last born. Last borns are privileged.
It's a pleasure to be here at not just for the parties, which we've heard a lot about. Thank you, Damilola, for organising this important event to mark the publication of Transmissions in History, a book which celebrates the many ways in which Professor Lovejoy's research has, and I quote Professor Falola here, changed the nature of the conversation in African history. In thinking about today's event, I realised that it's almost 20 years since I first met Professor Lovejoy at a conference on Liverpool and transatlantic slavery at the Albert Dock in Liverpool. The paper I gave at that conference focused on British abolitionist perspectives on Sierra Leone, but in the intervening period, it's abundantly clear that Professor Lovejoy's influence, inspiration, and mentorship have fundamentally changed my own academic conversations about Sierra Leone's history, which I'm very grateful. Damilola asked me to pick a chapter to comment on today, and I found it very difficult because various chapters in Transformations in History reflect the many new insights that I've developed on slave trading, slavery, pawnship, ransoming, and Islamic influences in West Africa, among other issues. So in my comments today, I'd like to reflect on some perceptive comments on the hallmarks of Professor Lovejoy's scholarship referred to in Chapter 2. The making of Paul Lovejoy refers to how, and again I quote Professor Falola, further commendation should be given for his role in preserving and making accessible primary sources for other scholars to use. His academic leadership in promoting the study of African history is reflected in a series of British Library Endangered Archives projects in the Sierra Leone Public Archives. In 2010, he brought together an international team of historians and archivists to carry out a pilot project on the significance of the evidence stored at the Fura Bay campus of the University of Sierra Leone. 3 major EAP awards that followed have resulted in the digital preservation of hundreds of volumes, which, as those of you in the room have visited, will know were in a perilous state from terrible storage conditions and chronic underfunding.
The records preserved in the Sierra Leone Public Archives are of global importance to the history of the transatlantic slave trade and slaveries, and as we heard from Katrina, include a series of registers of liberated Africans documenting the names and physical characteristics of the first cohorts of individuals released at Freetown between 1808 and 1819. And there's quite a story about our realization of what we were looking at, maybe for the party. Making these sources freely and widely available on the British Library website a decade ago has prompted lively new debates on sources of coerced labour in the aftermath of British abolition. In 2020, the head of the Endangered Archives programme, Sam Sheikh, reported that these digitised sources were being used globally in a long list of countries, including Vietnam and Argentina. So, interesting list. Through Professor Lovejoy's leadership, funding has been made available for the training of archivists and the appointment of new staff in Sierra Leone. Earlier this month, Albert Moore, the senior government archivist, sent me a lengthy comment on the tremendous impact of the work commenced by Professor Lovejoy in building up local capacity and supporting his team in the archives. Closely allied to this commitment to the preservation of endangered sources is his leadership in digital humanities initiatives. Freedom Narratives exemplifies how the results of research have been made widely available in databases. Supporting the research endeavours of other scholars is also one of the hallmarks of Professor Lovejoy's approach, and this is reflected, and it's just one instance, in his support for Jane Lander's Slave Society's digital archive. These databases reflect Professor Lovejoy's profound interest in reconstructing the identities of individuals, which are then used to challenge contemporary representations of enslaved people as cargo and commodities, another point made by Professor Falola in Chapter 2. In terms of public engagement, the EAP projects in Sierra Leone have recently featured in an exhibition at the British Library. But this public engagement is not a new approach. Some 30 years ago, Professor Lovejoy was one of the consultants for the development of the first transatlantic slave trade gallery, entitled Against Human Dignity, in Liverpool, which attracted millions of visitors and changed the nature of the debate on the slave trade in Liverpool. And I was working there at the time and was aware of that happening. His important contributions to film and television can also be seen in interviews for a Time Watch documentary in 1997, which I used for many years with my students, as well as his more recent work in the development of a UNESCO 4-part series on slavery routes, a series which has been widely disseminated to the general public and in schools. So bringing those ideas together, preserving archives, developing public history initiatives, and debating international approaches to the teaching of slave trading and slavery in schools are all areas that grow out of and complement Professor Lovejoy's phenomenal body of scholarship. These types of initiatives, however, are very time-consuming, but are further evidence of how he has changed the conversation about African history, not only among historians, but also for a far wider population outside academia. His intellectual generosity, a phrase Katrina also used, as Professor Falola notes, is reflected in how he has mentored future generations of scholars. And I think we can all agree that the warmth they feel towards him has really shone through this afternoon. The collegiate spirit that Paul has engendered here at York University has always been abundantly clear in the many conferences I've attended at the Tubman Institute. And this positive spirit continues to yield an influential body of scholarship. Thank you again, Paul, for everything, for your intellectual inspiration, generosity, and friendship. Thank you.
And I believe Professor Tony Falola is next in line to speak.
Thank you very much. Professor Adebayo for organizing this conference. You are like our grandson now, because we taught those who taught you, and we are glad. And thanks for formally launching this book on Paul. I'm very grateful. Amsa, who spoke a moment ago, said I should use a cache of Paul's work. And I said, Amsa, I'm not going to do that. And the reviewers of this book said, where are the footnotes? Because the footnotes are so few. And I said, look, I've been reading Paul. And I just said, I've been reading him, and I'm just going to reflect on his writings without going back to the writings. And Toby, who was just left to be green, he was the one who created this title for the book, Transformations in History. And I'm very grateful. And what I did is a full-blown reflection on his writings. I don't know whether he will launch responses challenging what I've said. Suzanne mentioned the Liverpool conference 20 years ago. I was there. And with Paul, we've been to Brazil together, to Costa Rica, to Nigeria, Austin, Texas, Canada many times, England, Germany, Spain, and some other places that time will not allow me to mention. We do not follow the same trajectory because by the time we became collaborators, I had acquired interest in modern history. Indeed, we were supposed to finish a book, which we didn't complete. We finished one on pawnship and some essays. Because it's more focused in the area of slavery, pre-colonial economy, and I was moving away to more contemporary history. We worked together with Sydney that Martin Klein mentioned when I was teaching in the same department. I co-taught a course with Sydney on world history, and I took over Paul Lovejoy's classes. I taught his classes in 1991 when he was on leave. I enjoyed teaching those classes. I did not use a syllabus, I'm afraid. And he has assisted my students. I've assisted his students. Amsa, that spoke a moment ago, I was his external supervisor. Bashiru, who couldn't speak, I was his external examiner. And Jemiladi, I just wrote a blurb for his forthcoming book. And most of his students also see me as their teacher. I can speak to issues about his family because Henry, his son, is also like my son. And Henry has also become a distinguished historian, developing great ideas in digital humanities. He couldn't join us today because he's attending a major conference on that topic. Martin Klein mentioned Paul Lovejoy's and party. Yes, I cannot remember the number of parties. And I'm sure those of you attending physically, you are going to his house where you are going to eat and drink all night. I couldn't be there because I just finished the annual Africa conference and I'm heading to South Africa, first flight on Saturday. One last comment from me. Years ago, I developed a proposal to create what I call a dream team I wanted to make the Department of History at Austin the #1 in the field of African diaspora. And I was given the go-ahead to do that. So I gave Paul Lovejoy a job. He refused. He got an offer from Wisconsin, where he was trained by Van Sina and Philip Cotton. So he didn't come. No fight. I brought him back again for the second time. No luck. But I still said I would do the dream team because he was supposed to be the first to come. So I hired David Eltis. He got a nice contract. He didn't come. He went to Emory. Then I said, okay, Tony Hopkins, Cambridge University, come. He accepted and spent over a decade and went back to Cambridge. Law, come. Robin Law said, no, I'm not coming. I think Law went to Israel and Juliet Walker. Historians, we don't deal with counterfactual if arguments, but suppose they had all accepted. Juliet Walker, David Eltis, Robin Law, Tony Hopkins, Paul Lovejoy. This would have been the best department of history ever created. And people were saying, Falola, why are you bringing all these stars? And I said, I'm bringing all of them because if we were able to do that, we'll have created the best department in African diaspora studies. Well, another generation will rethink this process, the idea of the dream team, and the idea of the future of the discipline. Paul discovered me. I didn't discover Paul. He traveled all the way to Nigeria to locate me. He was the one. He should write a book, In Search of Falola. He traveled the way saying, where is this Falola? Writing so much. And between Paul and I, people wonder what is left. And I tell them what is left is a huge gap. Today he released a new book. I hope it speaks to it. And he's been working on this book for over 20 years. I read the drafts. I read some of the initial essays. Mbakwaka, that book was released this morning. Congratulations. And the last time I was looking for him, he was in Virginia, finishing his book on the major figure, Oleado Ikwano. God will give you long life to complete that project. Congratulations, Paul, and thanks Adebayo for using this book. And many more books will be written on him. And Martin, I wish you long life. I'm glad at 92. I think you are 1934. I think you are more than 91 years old. I think you were born 1934, but I couldn't check. But I'm glad that we're all together in Toronto. You allow me to work with one of your students. I was the external examiner of Philip Sakanok, who became distinguished in Dalhousie. I hope this partnership will remain, and Adebayo will lead a new generation to create a more powerful, more formidable intellectual space than what Paul and Martin were able to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to everyone who have spoken so far. I wish we had more time to listen to more people. In fact, I was just looking through the participant list, those who were still present on Zoom, and I see so many distinguished names, including, if I may highlight two people. I'm biased, obviously. I see my uncle that has been mentioned, referenced. Incidentally, so being at York is more like a coincidence. I mean, well, there's no coincidence in life, really. It's providence, really. Because even when I was applying, I made no mention, I made no reference to anything. I was just applying like anyone else to a committee that was chaired by Jose Kuto. And I believe Deb Neal was a member of that committee. She was here earlier. And I never said anything because I wasn't even really expecting to get the job. Not because I didn't think I was qualified, but because it's Canada and I was in the UK and I knew the rules and the politics of recruitment, the Canadian, I mean, thing where you have to recruit a Canadian first before other people. So I wasn't really I would not have been super disappointed. That's the way to put it. I wanted it, but I wouldn't have been hurt if I didn't get it. But fortunately, I got hired, and then eventually I had to mention that, oh, actually, my uncle was here as a visiting professor early. I mean, Paul knows when I eventually talked about it. But even this is the first time I'm saying it publicly, really. But I saw him in the chat, so I'm glad to see him here as well. The second person I want to acknowledge was my PhD supervisor, who is also on Zoom. The last time I checked, Professor Gareth Austin, who is Paul Lovejoy's friend of decades, several decades. And so when I arrived here, it was so easy for me to get myself embedded into the local network here amongst the Africanist historians, even beyond Africa, really. Gillian from Glendon is here today. We've had lunches and many times. I mean, Rose at Glendon as well. The other Africanist hired at the same time as I was hired, Rose Ndenge, who is not here. I wasn't sure whether I wrote to her directly, but I hope she saw the advert somewhere. I mean, the point is to say I've had a good time here at York so far, and it's also thanks to Paul of just generosity. Like Dr. Jembradi said, I've had lunch with Paul a few times and I've never had to pay as well, which is good. I mean, in my opinion, I think I don't have to pay. I mean, not because I can't pay, but because I think if I were to copy, if to parody what Falola said in the gerontocratic, like in locus parentis sense, I mean, a child should not pay. I mean, in that sense, I mean, and I look forward to more of those events. And like everyone said, the parties and all of that. I've had, even though I've only been at York for a few years, I've had a couple of social events during COVID when just as COVID was ending. Look, Paul felt we can't continue just sitting at home. So he turned his house into a seminar. So we'd meet, I think, every 2 weeks or thereabout, like in his home. Stephen Rockwell from the University of Toronto would join occasionally. A couple of other historians that were present would all come discuss papers. It was there that I heard Faiza Farah's work for the first time. I think Dr. Jemradi as well presented in one of those seminars. And so it was a good time overall. I was new. I was teaching online because everything was online. So it was an opportunity to meet people. I think it was also where I met Bruno for the first time. Bruno is here in the room, and a couple of other historians, and Dr. Hamza as well. That was where I met him for the first time. So it's been a great. It's been a big deal knowing Paul and sort of watching him from afar. I mean, personally, I've been inspired by my own PhD supervisor and a couple of other Africanist historians who are working in Europe. The idea of a research group fascinates me as a historian. Obviously, to have a research group, it means you need to be successful at bringing in money and all of that. And I know that's mostly common in the sciences, but coming here away from the UK and away from Europe, and seeing Paul, whom I call Baba. I mean, I started writing to him, dear Paul, and one day I said, so I wrote to him, I mean, I said, I am not comfortable calling you Paul. Let me just call you Baba. Yeah, literally. I just because I felt, wait, this is someone who, I mean, my PhD supervisor made me call him by his first name. He had to write to me to do that as well. But I felt Paul is even much more older in that sense. But ultimately, it is what it is. I'm grateful for your generosity. I am speaking. I wanted to express myself as a host, but I thought I'll just wait. If there is time, I will, and if there is no time, I won't. And thankfully, we've got a few more minutes to extend over our 5:30 timeline. We started at 10 minutes past, so I hope you can allow us to end at 5:40 for those who in other time zones. But now I'm going to invite Paul himself to sort of say something for about maybe 5 minutes or thereabout to respond, and then we would bring the event to a close. Oh, sure. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. As you can imagine, this is quite an event for me. I would like to say one thing at first here about paying for lunch. See, I was taught, I don't know, by example, I was taught there's something called seniority. And when you're with, when I was with Van Sina or Curtin, I never paid for lunch. Ever. Curtin had his seminars, they both had their seminars in their homes. At that time, it was, possible to do, which is no longer possible, as we know. But at that time, it was. And after every seminar, Curtin served sherry. I mean, like, now from my background, this was a different world. But the part of it that stuck was that at one time when I tried to pay something with Curtin, he bluntly just told me, he says, look, you're not in a position to do that. And I sort of feel the same when I think at times it helps to, I have thought it's time to help with when you actually meeting in a more informal setting, like over not just a coffee, which is cheap, but something more substantial so that you can actually get more done. You can get more interaction. And it's been interesting because what we're hearing from the person who I consider to be Professor Adebayo's nephew, this man, he has to call me Baba. Well, I respect that. For others, as you've heard, I'm called Zaki. And I respect that too. And, but I want to talk a bit about Falola, because Falola, it's amazing. Well, you're amazing. He knows that I think that he's amazing. We bonded so quickly, so immediately, so intensely. And that bond has endured through all these years, through so many things. And what he has done, the mentorship that he has provided, the numbers of scripts in Nigeria he's read, the number of students in Nigeria whose committees he's been on, it's, I don't know anybody else who's even approaches the types of things that he's done, much of which is just, well, if you know about it, you know, but it's not anything that he talks about. And if you don't know his monthly listserv of African music, you're out of it. You really got to get onto the line so that you get every month Falola's picks of the month. Now that guy knows music. That guy knows music so much that he introduced me in Texas to country music. He, everywhere he drives, you know, he was playing country music as loud as you could play it. And he says, I love it, I love it. You know what these people do with the English language is astonishing. And then I started hearing things in a sort of a different way, and you know, darling, I'm feeling so lonesome. I'd call you on the phone some, but I don't have a dime. Now, how can you beat that? Here is the master of everything that knows about African music, knowing so much about, and that's just in the music area, in everything, every subject, every area. Oh, he has a collection of uh, extremely rare Onitsha market literature and publications in Nigeria of novels and poetry and stuff like that that no one knows about. He not only has it, he knows it. It's in his fiber, the way he thinks. You know, he's not a historian anymore. I mean, he wrote this book about me and some of my ideas are that, yeah, that. No, he's a poet. You know, he's an artist. You know, whatever he wants to do, he moves. And he's, Toyin doesn't realize that I didn't go to Texas and be part of his dream team because, well, at the time, then Wisconsin looked attractive because it was a cluster appointment and I would have influence in hiring several other people and it looked really nice. And so I went to Austin and I love the music. I love the food. And I went to Madison where all my radical days, all my radical days and all this. And I just said, I don't want to live in the United States. I can't live in the United States. It's impossible. Boy, can you imagine now living in the fascist state that it's become? Oh. You know, Toy, it wasn't because I didn't want to work with you or live near you and do all that, but there are some strange people down there. So, we worked together very well on the pawn ship in particular, which was very important because at the time that we did it, it was virtually completely unrecognized as phenomenon in African history or in Africa, period, at any time. And about the only thing anybody knew about was what Mary Douglas had written as sort of like it was a blood pack exchange between families, which it isn't. She was completely wrong. And then so we put this together and worked together, and then never did write a book that we were going to synthesize things, but you know, that was a major discovery and major step forward. But there's another publishing story. When Toyin came to York, I happened to be had inherited from Peter Gutkin editorship of a series that was on African studies that was by Sage Publication, and I sent him a manuscript by Toyin, and they turned it down. And quite frankly, without using the F word, I told them where to go. That if they didn't like my opinion on what should be published, and that I thought this guy was an amazing person, that I wasn't interested in being connected with them at all. And then I was subsequently became associated with Africa World Press, which has been a wonderful experience, resulted in lots of books and lots of publications and lots of promotion of younger scholars and scholars from everywhere so that they get in print. And turning down a Toyin Polola manuscript, I think that maybe that's the inspiration why he's published 200 books. I can't imagine anybody. Toyin, I can't imagine. How can you publish 200 books? You know, I was there when his wife and daughter presented him with a book that they put together, which was 100 pages long, because it was the cover pages for the first 100 books that he had published. That was the book. So actually, other than dabbling, we're still waiting to get copies of the book. So we're waiting for Toyin to get the publisher to send a few, and hopefully it would be really good, I think, is if we could somehow convince the publisher to give a special discount for anybody who's in this room. Like the cost of the book should be about 10% of what they're asking. And then we'd all buy it. But to be able to be here and to hear what's been said and to reflect and to see people that some of whom I haven't seen for a long time, to get recognition from my dear friends who run Roots Pharmacy and organize this wonderful community of future leaders. What they do for children in the neighborhood and how they make them see that education is everything. How they really implement the Garveyite principles is that if you don't know your roots, you can't know who you are. And the Garveyite principles that there's only one race, the human race. To have people like that in this community working with children who they call the future leaders it's what's going to defeat the type of Trumpism that's out there. We need it, and I'm very thankful to them, as I am with my students, but you wouldn't necessarily know that part of what I've been through and exposed to. Just as my experiences in Costa Rica have been just amazingly astonishing. Even though I don't know more than about 2 words of Spanish, it's so wonderful to live in different places if you interact with people in different settings and see that, there's really a lot of good in this world. We just got to stand strong right now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So we have just one more thing to do before the event comes to an end. And please note there is some it's here, right? It's at the back. Okay. There's some refreshments at the back. So it's not we're not asking you to go with an empty stomach. It's not real food. If you want some real food, there is a reception at again at Papa's house. It's again, I forgot the address. 68, yes. 558, yes. Yeah, I just know my way there. I do like most places in Toronto that I go, I don't even think about the address anymore. I just drive there. So it's 58 Bowlesfield Road, which is just about, if you want to walk right from here, it's about 10 minutes. Just from this room. It's in the village. You have to go through, I'm not sure. Anyways, but so we have just one more thing to do. I am going to introduce hand over to Henry Lovejoy. I mean, we have many academics, sons and daughters, people who have self-acclaimed academic sons and self-acclaimed last PhD student, like this Gemrada in the room. But we have Dr. Henry Lovejoy, who is professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, a fantastic historian of African and its diaspora, leading in so many ways in the world of digital humanities, done fantastic work. I'm really, really impressed by what he does. And he has the fortune, or otherwise, I don't know, Henry, you know better. You have the fortune or otherwise of being Paul's son. I'm sure he's experienced Paul in different ways than other people. So he's going to say a few words and then maybe reflect on the book of abstracts that I said book of abstracts, on the tributes that we collected, and then I'm gonna invite the Tubman director again to close the event, and that will be all. So in about 10-ish minutes, we're out of here. The floor is yours, Henry.
Thanks very much, Damilola. And thank you very much, Toyin, for putting this together and developing the book about my father. As Damilola said, I have this unique honor today of presenting a book of tributes to my father, who, as the son of this great man, I'm also one of his students. This is someone that I get to call Professor Dad. So as his child, I had the rare privilege of growing up inside the very community I think many people here spoke about today. This was built through decades of dedication to African history, African cultures, and the African diaspora. The tribute book that's being presented today gathers over 80 reflections from over 15 different countries across generations, geographies, offering a powerful picture of your life devoted not just to scholarship, but to solidarity, kinship, and care. As a student and now an associate professor, I think many of you at various points in my life asked me if I was ever going to be a professor, and I think I always said no, but here I am today. And as I've learned the field, I've really realized how rigorous Dad's work has been. It's meticulously researched, deeply analytical, often field-changing, but it was never just about the page and the archive. It was never about the production. He taught that history lives in people, in stories, in memory, in struggle, but more importantly, in celebration. I witnessed how his commitment to Africa was not only intellectual, but how he lived it, how he honored the traditions, the values, the resilience of African peoples and the peoples in the diaspora, the way he worked, the way he taught, the way he shared, how he built lasting relationships, the generosity that he gave to every one of his students as far as I could see. It wasn't just me that he would review and send feedback within 15 minutes. At no matter time of day, it was everyone. Ours was a home that welcomed people from across the globe. Scholars, students, elders, youth, non-academics, musicians, everyone. It was a place where conversations about identity, liberation, and colonialism happened over jollof rice, jerk goat, couscous, and cheese, where the archive met the dinner table. Through these many gatherings, conferences, and spontaneous kitchen debates, I came to see what my father was building. Not just a network, but he really built a family. And yes, even good family needs hospitality. So from an early age, I was trained in the essential rituals, how to serve elders, how to greet with respect, how to pour libations with meaning. And long before I was of drinking age, how to uncork wine and offer it graciously, never wasting a drop, always serving others first. These were not just party tricks I was taught. They were life lessons in humility, generosity, and presence. What I witnessed growing up is reflected and again in the tributes that I've had the honor of reading from what I was hearing just briefly this afternoon. And I really see how 5 core themes have emerged: friendship, scholarship, research, mentorship, and support. These are not simply academic futures, they are African values. I saw my father live them. I saw him extend them to his graduate students, who became my brothers and sisters. I watched him offer them again and again across borders, languages, institutions, and generations. He's still doing that today, and I'm sorry I can't be there. This tribute book is full of voices that affirm what I've always known. That Dad, that his truest legacy is not about his books or projects, but the community he built. Community that reflects best of what African history teaches us. That we are connected, accountable to one another, and made whole through shared purpose. So I do want to present this tribute book. I'm so grateful that you all showed up here today. Much respect to you all, and much love to you, Dad.
We love you, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we're now at the end of the event, and I'm just going to hand over the floor to Professor Shalewa Olawe, who would close with some announcements. Thank you very much for coming. To everyone who stayed until this time online, joining from multiple time zones. It's just been an awesome event. It went better than, I expected that it would go, with more people in the room and also on Zoom. Because sometimes you see 50 people registering to attend an event and only 10 people showing up. But here, I've been quite impressed with the turnout, both in person and online. If everyone who came at the beginning had stayed until the end, we would have run out of seats. The reason we still have seats is because people have had to leave. It's been a great event, and obviously the honor is well deserved. It's not if it's not deserved, we won't all be here at this time of the evening, and people wouldn't have had to come all the way from various parts of the country and even internationally. So thank you once again for coming, and that'll be all from me. Thank you very much to my chair of my department, who is no longer here as well, and to the director of Tubman for hosting us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Damilola, for hosting this wonderful time where we get to celebrate our very first, our founding director of the Harriet Tubman Institute. Like I said earlier, I am particularly grateful that he walked so that I could run. Professor Lovejoy, once again, it really has been an honor to know you. I just picked something up. Forgive me for doing this just in a really quick minute. Just listening to your son speak, I remember that when I started at York, and I was trying to figure out how to juggle academic life with family life, and someone said something to me, find a way to balance it so that you can have access to your grandkids. And what the person explained to me was that as much as the job is great, you also have to have a relationship with your kids. And seeing this right now shows me that it's possible. So thank you for teaching me yet another thing today. I would like to sign out on behalf of the Harriet Tubman Institute, which is an institute that Professor Lovejoy was, I would like to say, one of the founding fathers. We cannot speak of the history of Harriet Tubman without speaking about the Harriet Tubman Institute for Research at Africa and its Diaspora at York University without speaking about Professor Paul Lovejoy. And to round up, I like to say that for those who aren't aware of who we are, what we stand for, we are a safe space. Excuse me. We are a safe space for research in Africa and its diaspora that usually people find uncomfortable to write about or speak about. Professor Paul Lovejoy has made sure that he has created that kind of space for us. And one of the ways that we do so is through our journal, and one particular way that we do so is through our international conferences, ones that we have happening this year. We usually host it every 2 years, except for the period of COVID. This year, it's taking place in Jamaica, October 14 to 17, 2025. And the theme for this year is Reflections on Repair, Responsibility, Resistance, and Reform, New Pathways. And so we welcome you all, because there's a call for papers going on, to submit your abstract. It's on our website, and it's ongoing until May the 1st, 2025. A lot of the things that we do, a lot of discussions that we have on decolonialism and all of that are things even related to what Professor Lovejoy has written on the histories that he has put on. And so this is an opportunity for us to meet in person, to discuss, and to look for a way forward. Thank you, everyone, once again. We still have about 50 people online. Honestly, that's a testament to who you are, Professor Lovejoy. It is a testament to who you are. So thank you, everyone, for waiting so long, for being here, regardless of your time zones. Thank you so much for coming physically, and I really do apologize for not being there in person, for coming physically to the Harriet Tubman space. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you, and bye-bye.